Welcome to Novara Live. Coming up tonight, Trump is, quote, very disappointed by a Houthi attack on a Saudi oil tanker in the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. Burnham's first week policy blitz continues apace. We talk to Julia Davies of Patriotic Millionaires about their latest plea to pay more tax. And finally, a prominent Zionist Democrat gets his clock cleaned by Krystal Ball on Breaking Points. I'm Helena, aka NoJusticeMTG, and tonight, for the first time in the studio, I am joined by Barry Malone, the one and only. How you
I'm
doing,
really
Barry?
excited. I've actually really wanted to be in the studio with you. It's great. But
100%.
go easy on me, okay? I am a little bit intimidated by your massive brain. So like don't put me under too much pressure, okay?
You flatter me, Barry. As always, if you'd like to support our work, you can sign up at novaramedia.com/support. You can also listen to the show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And as always, make sure that you let us know what you think in the comments section down below. Yemen's Houthi organization has opened a new front in the sea as the illegal US-Israeli war on Iran enters a dangerous new phase. The Houthis, who are aligned with Iran and control northern Yemen, have announced they are imposing a naval blockade on Saudi Arabia. Last night, they kept to their word and hit 2 Saudi oil tankers in the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. You can see one of the tankers, the Encelia, abruptly stopping on this marine traffic tracker. Now, this is important because with the Strait of Hormuz already closed, traffic through the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait has hugely increased. And the closure of Bab-el-Mandeb could have disastrous effects for a global economy already feeling the impact of the seemingly never-ending battle over the Strait of Hormuz. If you take a look at this map from Al Jazeera, you can see that Bab-el-Mandeb is on the opposite side of the Saudi coastline to the Strait of Hormuz. It connects the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, and the Indian Ocean, and is an important route between Asia and Europe via the Suez Canal, as again you can see on this map. Now, at its narrowest point, it's just 18 miles wide and is effectively controlled by the Houthis. The reason that's a big deal is that about 12% of global trade moves through Bab-el-Mandeb, and about a quarter of the world's container traffic. Oil surged more than 6% off the back of the Houthi attack, breaking $100 a barrel mark for the first time since May. This is all going to pile even more pressure on US President Donald Trump as he heads towards midterm elections in November. It's not an exaggeration to say that the Iran war, which is hugely unpopular with the Americans, even with Republican voters, is threatening to consume his entire presidency. Trump had this to say on Tuesday about the possibility of the Houthis closing Bab-el-Mandeb.
So far, it hasn't happened, might happen, but we take care of things. If something like that happens, we take care of it. You know, we've done that with the Houthis before. And we haven't heard from them in a while since we did what we did originally. It was about 45 days of very powerful action we took against the Houthis. And we've had no problem with the Houthis. They've had no problem with us for a long period of time, including during this conflict. I think that if there is something like that, we'll just have to take care of business.
So that's the Houthis threatened. But today, Iran was in his sights with this post on his Truth Social platform. A year ago, the United States of America attacked very powerfully the Houthis for their interference with commerce and trade by shooting at ships. Since that time, and during our conflict with Iran, they've acted very responsibly. Unfortunately, now they are starting up again, shooting at 2 Saudi Arabian ships last night. Please let this truth serve to represent that if they do this again, the US will hold Iran responsible, in that the Houthis are a surrogate and/or proxy of Iran, and major military punishment will be inflicted upon Iran, and of course the Houthis themselves, who I am very disappointed with, in that they have until now acted very professionally and smart. Thank you for the attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. I thought they had the art of the deal. I thought they were going to play by the rules, but no, unfortunately not. Quite frankly, they're acting way unprofessionally and less smart than I expected. Barry, now, how big of a deal really is this? What impact is it going to have on the war in the long term? And are we going to see a serious escalation from here?
Okay, but first, who knew Trump would remind me of my parents? I'm so disappointed in you. I thought you were smart.
I'm not angry with the Houthis. Yeah, I'm just very disappointed.
You know, this is a huge deal. It's a massive deal. And just to give you some figures that I looked up today, it means that an additional 7% of the global oil supply will be disrupted. US gas prices immediately hit $4 a gallon, right? And they already had gone up for over the months of the war. Combined with the Strait of Hormuz, we're looking at about 25% of the global oil trade with Bab-el-Mandeb and the Strait of Hormuz combined. And if ships can't get through either route, they're going to have to go down and around the southern tip of Africa, which adds like at a minimum about 2 weeks to their journey. And I think with that 2 weeks added for the entire global fleet, you're talking about fees of about or costs of about another $7 to $9 billion. For Saudi also, it's like an existential threat for Saudi Arabia, right? Because when the Strait of Hormuz closed, they were shipping oil over from the Persian Gulf to the port on Bab-el-Mandeb. I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, it's a 1,200 kilometer pipeline that they were shipping oil from there to there. And they used to ship a relatively small amount of oil to go out by that route, but now they're shipping 70% through that pipeline and out through Bab-el-Mandeb. So that's massive for the Saudis, you know? And actually, just for our audience, for a second, I want to remind them of who the Houthis are, because I think we always hear this, the Houthis, yeah, watch out for the Houthis. But like, it's like not always broken down who the Houthis are. And they're a group who now control northern Yemen, right? Because I mean, for years they have fought the Yemeni military, but it all stepped up in 2011, around the time of the Arab Spring, and then in 2014 they took the capital, Sana'a, and as everyone will remember, that then provoked this massive Saudi Arabia-led war against the Yemenis. But that kicked off in 2014, and by 2022 they still hadn't dislodged the Houthis. And they had to sign a peace deal. And here we are now in 2006. And I actually think that that's like a big warning for the Americans, for the Saudis, that the Houthis are not easy to defeat. I mean, we've seen with Trump and the US administration, they obviously massively miscalculated how easy it would be to either topple the Islamic Republic or, completely destroy its military capabilities. I would contend that they're going to see the same thing with the Houthis. It's going to be really, really hard to stop the Houthis from disrupting Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. So, I think Trump and the US, they're caught again because, their resources are already stretched trying to stop Iranian missiles around the Gulf. And now they're going to have to potentially, if they want to fight this militarily, they're going to have to divert military resources. I think they're in a really tough spot with this.
I mean, we saw it when the original closure of the Red Sea that was done by the Houthis kicked off, and they responded with like Operation Prosperity Guardian, I think was the name, back in when they were disrupting trade because of Israel's genocide in Gaza. And it was difficult. I mean, they did airstrikes on Sana'a, and it didn't really do much in terms of disrupting the ability for the Houthis to close the strait. It mostly seemed like the only real way of being able to force them back was engaging in negotiation, because once Israel will agree to a ceasefire, the strait reopened. And the same, most likely in my mind, will be true when it comes to Iran. As soon as America and Israel stop engaging in their illegal war, Iran and their proxies will stop engaging in what they rightly feel is defensive action that is necessary to be able to protect themselves.
Yeah, and that's the thing, like that campaign against the Houthis when they closed the strait for the first time, or when they disrupted traffic through the strait, that was 2 months. It was 2 months long. And as you say, in 2 months, it ended with negotiation. That's never what Trump says in the beginning. He says this will be super easy and we'll end this militarily and they'll back down. But what he's seen with the Iranians and the Houthis is that they have not done that. And it comes back to this idea of there's no way out for Trump, right? He's trapped because he needs to, quote unquote, win something. He feels like he needs to save face. He feels like he needs to go back to the US public and say, I got this, I won that. The truth is, the US public doesn't care about that anymore. They're not waiting for some explanation of what Trump has won. All they know is that they're paying more for gas, and that, they're caught up seemingly in another foreign war, which they never wanted. Not even the MAGA base, because, a war in Iran was never like a MAGA project. It was never something that MAGA wanted. And so I think that, Trump is caught in this really, really insanely difficult place. And he's flailing policy-wise. Like, it's like you look at it and you think, what the hell is the goal now? And like that was actually underlined for me again yesterday when he signed this like nuclear cooperation deal with the Saudis, where the Saudis are now going to be allowed to enrich uranium, which we know ad nauseum because of Iran is a potential route to a nuclear weapon. There was a similar deal on nuclear cooperation signed with the UAE. It's a long time ago, back in 2009. But I think they weren't allowed to enrich. But Saudi are going to be allowed to enrich without checks, like are imposed on some other countries. And so that's now angered Israel. all the while this entire thing is going on. It just feels like
It's the art of the deal, though.
there's no
It's
strategy.
the art of the deal, Barry.
Like, there's no sense to it.
Well, the thing is when it comes to like the conflict stuff, Trump was used to the way in which he did negotiations before was engage in a belligerent action, show a force, and then say, I've shown you what I can do. Let me bring you to the table because I am now in a position of strength. Like in terms of like trade policy, he did this too. We're slapping these huge tariffs on you. We're in the higher negotiating position. You have to capitulate to our demands. Otherwise, we'll do what we did again. And that's what happened in Venezuela. We'll steal your president. We'll just take him from his bedroom when he's sleeping
Yeah.
and put him on trial for gun charges that are nonsensical, for example. And then Venezuela will be forced to negotiate with us from a position of weakness. And he thought he could do this throughout this war. Go, we're going to impose these military incursions. They'll come to the table and then negotiate. And both Iran and indeed their proxies in form of the Houthis have shown there is no need for them to negotiate because they are the ones who hold the cards. Like he's literally in the position that he told Zelensky he was in the
Yeah.
White House. Like, do you know he doesn't
no
have the
cards.
cards. He doesn't know cards, right?
But I think strategically, like the one of the problems there was what I'm saying. They didn't seem to go in with any clear demand, right? It was all over the place. There was the 12-day war the year before, when they used the bunker buster bombs, and he came out afterwards and said Iran's nuclear program is completely destroyed, right? Then, he's under pressure from Netanyahu to what? To topple the Islamic Republic, to topple the Iranian government. So a new pretext comes up. The pretext is the protests. We're going to go in and save the protesters. Then the protest ends, and nuclear is back on the table. Nuclear capability, which had apparently been obliterated, is now used as a reason. But the reason is the goal was that Netanyahu wanted to topple the government. So for the Islamic Republic, that became a fight for its life. Like the Islamic Republic had considered, or it had been talked about, that they could close the Strait of Hormuz before. I mean, people had talked about that as a possibility during different sort of geopolitical problems for like 2 decades.
I mean, it was even pointed out to Trump. I believe it was by J.D. Vance, according to, was it the Washington Post maybe, who talked about this, like in the Situation Room, was told, like, he told Trump, like, they might close the Strait of Hormuz. I think it was J.D. Vance or Marco Rubio, and he was warned about this and went ahead with it anyway.
But they were fighting for their lives, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's what he didn't seem to get. If you go in with the goal of toppling a government and killing all of its senior leaders, then, all cards are on the table. They're going to pull all the stops out. So again, like just eminently predictable that they would do this. And also I want to say that, I want to say that the Houthis have their own strategic reasons for closing the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, and they have their own problems with Saudi Arabia, and they have their own domestic concerns. They're not only a proxy, right? But Reuters had a report, I think last week or the week before, in which they'd spoken to 4 sources. I believe there was like 2 Iranian sources, a regional source, a few sources who said that Iran has told the Houthis, stand by, close it if they start attacking our infrastructure, particularly our power infrastructure. That's exactly what happened. The Americans started hitting civilian infrastructure. Potentially, that's what it looks like, which, again, as we said, is a war crime. And it looks like the Houthis did exactly what they had agreed with Iran to do, which was to close it once infrastructure started to get hit. Now, if Reuters knew that, the US government knew that, but still they went ahead and hit the infrastructure, and now they're in an even more difficult position than they were in the first place. So again, it's like, it's this ridiculous place that we're in where Trump and the administration keep getting told that's what's going to happen. And then it happens. And they act surprised.
It's not very professional or smart.
No, it really isn't.
very, very disappointed in Donald Trump. Now, with Andy Burnham's new government making its first forays into foreign policy, the war in Iran is already proving a challenge. On Tuesday, Burnham approved the continued use of British military bases by the US for quote-unquote defensive strikes on Iran. Though it's never fully explained what defensive strikes even means. Now, obviously, this didn't go down well with many on the left. And Burnham's green light came after the US military started striking what appeared to be civilian infrastructure in Iran, as Barry pointed out. This includes roads, bridges, food silos, and indeed water facilities as well. A reminder that attacking civilian infrastructure is indeed a war crime. Meanwhile, Foreign Secretary Ed Miliband has hit the ground running at the ASEAN summit in Manila with a lightning round of handshaking. Miliband has met EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaya Kallas, Indian Minister of External Affairs Dr. Subramaniam Jaishankar, Japanese Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi, Canadian Foreign Minister Anita Anand, China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi, and today the big one, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So far, Miliband hasn't really gone off script when it comes to Iran and Gaza.
And following our government, the UK government's historic recognition of the state of Palestine, we must not lose sight of the plight of those suffering in Gaza and the West Bank. And we will continue to work with others to bring about a just and lasting peace to deliver security for both Palestinians and Israelis. Indeed, in this era of international instability, we must go even further to defend the principles at the heart of the UN Charter: respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, the peaceful settlement of disputes, the rule of law, and an international system in which countries large and small can make their own choices free from coercion.
Nothing there to bother Rubio, but I'm unsure whether he'll have heard what Miliband has had to say about Trump a few years ago. Look at this clip from a Sky News interview with the US ambassador to the UK, Warren Stevens, this morning.
Obviously, as you said, you disagreed with him on energy policy. I imagine you disagree with him on his views towards your boss, President Trump. He said, the ideas that we have shared values with a racist, misogynistic, self-confessed groper beggars belief.
Yeah, I've read those. Those were some time ago, I think, and hopefully his views have changed. I think
those were 2016. 2 years later, he said Donald Trump has lowered the bar for idiocy. He said Donald Trump has a peculiar relationship with Russia. Can he really be our top diplomat dealing with America?
Like I said, I think people's view of President Trump in 2016 is probably a lot different than it is in now 2025 and going forward. So, or 26 even. I'm sorry, wrong year. And we're, I would suspect his views have changed on President Trump, but I haven't talked to him about any of that.
Barry, so far Miliband doesn't seem to have said anything particularly different to what the Starmer government had to say on Iran or even Gaza. Do you think that's going to continue?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I say that in a really disappointed, in a sort of a disappointed way. I'm just, it's always the case, right, that people like Ed Miliband or people like Andy Burnham, before they take office, are quite forceful, right, on foreign policy. But then once they get through that door, once they get it, once Burnham gets into number 10 Downing Street and he sits down and he's briefed about foreign policy and he has to sign all the letters saying, if the UK is destroyed, here's what you need to do, submarine commanders, or, all of that stuff, then they really do become very kind of like realpolitik. And really, Miliband has said nothing different. They're still managing to put out statements in which they talk about the suffering of the Palestinian people without mentioning who is causing that suffering, without mentioning that it's an Israeli genocide that's causing that suffering. I mean, it's absolutely bloody galling. Like, here's a Labour government, regardless of whether, Ed Miliband or Andy Burnham, or Ed Miliband was in the government, were sort of directly involved or in positions as influential as they are now. It's a government that supported materially and diplomatically a genocide. Now we have new people in position who are essentially saying the same old thing, which is the suffering of the Palestinian people and not calling anyone out. And I actually looked at the readout that the UK government gave after the Ed Miliband meeting with Marco Rubio. Oh, by the way, did you notice that he didn't shake hands with Marco Rubio?
I didn't notice that,
It was all
no.
shaking hands, and then they were just kind of like staring at each other. It was a kind of an odd picture that we just showed on screen.
I think Ed Miliband's net zero policy probably violates an SPM7.
Probably. But and then like on a serious note, we have Trump, who it was reported to the media is apparently quote unquote deeply concerned about Ed Miliband being the new foreign secretary. So I guess it probably was kind of it was a high stakes meeting for Miliband today, right? But if you look at the readout that the UK government gave, discussing the situation in the Middle East, the foreign secretary highlighted the UK's consistent approach to the conflict, not the genocide, the defense of our people, our interests, and our allies. The foreign secretary made clear that the UK will continue to work with international partners to develop a viable plan to safeguard international shipping industry. I mean, look, I'm not even going to finish it. I mean, it's just the same old boring nonsense. It's exactly what Starmer would say. It's exactly what Yvette Cooper will say. And just to say that there's like a raging kind of question mark here, where Miliband also said at the ASEAN summit that he called for de-escalation. We're calling for de-escalation in Iran. We're calling for calm. How can you call for de-escalation and call for calm while all the while you are allowing your military bases be used by the Americans to attack Iran? And we've heard in the last few days that B-1 bombers might be taken off from those military bases and then attacking Iran. So, on the one hand, it's the UK government saying we call for calm. And then on the other hand, it's saying, hey, fly off from our bases and attack Iran.
Also, like when it says de-escalation, this isn't two sides like who've just had pent-up tensions forever, which has broken out in conflict. One side is invading the other. One side launched a war whilst violating the UN Charter, right? There's no de-escalation. The Americans and Israelis need to stop. They need to get out and stop doing their illegal war because they are entirely to blame for this.
Exactly
no one
right, an
asked them
illegal
to
war.
invade. They never sought permission from the UN Security Council, never laid out any justifications for this. They went to war because they wanted to, and they have dealt with the consequences in the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. There is no de-escalation here. American and the Israelis need to stop invading.
And that's the other thing. You said there about the fact that this is an illegal invasion. Or an illegal war on Iran. And in Ed Miliband's first statement about taking over as foreign secretary, he mentioned Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. Further down, it said Russia's illegal war on Ukraine. So we got Russian illegality twice. And then for
Gaza illegality? Mm-mm.
Yeah, no, we got the conflict in the Middle East. Like, again, total hypocrisy. And utter business as usual. And, we're talking about whether there's going to be a change. I know this has been talked about ad nauseum, but also, Burnham's Gaza apology, the quote unquote Gaza apology, which when you look into it is really a little more than a change in tone, I think. I don't think that there's much material there. Materially, again, it remains to be seen. Like, we'll see how this develops, but I don't think that the initial signs are very good. So when I look at the Gaza apology, when I look at the ongoing permission to use British military bases, when I look at, the sort of mealy-mouthed statements of Miliband, I know it's only 4 days in, but right now, I don't see any signs of significant change.
When it came to David Lammy, he had previously called Trump all sorts of names, just like Ed Miliband had called him like a racist and a misogynist, right? David Lammy's mind was changed by being bought some dinners, apparently. Do you think Ed Miliband's mind can be changed?
I don't know. They say that it's like, they say that it's their mind has been changed. It's not. It's their proximity to power, right? It's like all of a sudden I'm the foreign secretary and I've been flown around the world pressing the flesh, and I'm at all the G7 meets, and I'm at the Asia conference, and you get sucked into a world, I think, where you really believe that what you're doing is the right thing to be doing for quote unquote British interests. And so, people have said about the things that Miliband said about Trump years ago. Well, I'm sure he probably has a different take now. And I'm sure his take's exactly the same. He said Trump was groper in chief or something. I'm sure he probably still thinks Trump is groper in chief, but he took the job as foreign secretary, and so he's gonna play ball, right? He's gonna and again, I do want to say that if you look at everybody who could have potentially been appointed foreign secretary, Ed Miliband is far and away the best person who could have been put in that job. Absolutely no doubt. But so it'll be interesting to see the kind of the constraints that he operates under. And then also when you factor in the fact that there have been quite a lot of reports that have suggested that Burnham is not massively interested in foreign policy, or that he wanted to focus on domestic policy and have like a big dog as foreign secretary who could do more work than a typical foreign secretary would. Ed Miliband, actually you told me earlier, is a bit of a grafter, but you can't just send Ed Miliband to a G7 summit and stay at home.
It is interesting. Yeah, he's a very fastidious individual, but he doesn't have much gravitas. I think remember the
tough enough.
Hell yeah, I'm tough enough.
You don't think he's tough enough?
Definitely tough enough to deal with Marco Rubio.
Yeah. So look, again, early days, but The indications aren't good right now.
I mean, again, like if you are somebody who's focused on domestic issues like Andy Burnham is, right, you'll immediately want to just kind of pivot to let the Atlanticists deal with the foreign policy. I'm focused on bus prices. Newly minted Prime Minister Andy Burnham has been on a policy blitz in recent days. He announced a small but not insignificant cut of VAT and electricity bills and a return of the £2 bus fare cap earlier in the week. And he's upping the ante today by targeting small businesses also struggling with the faltering economy. I'm giving thousands of pubs, clubs and music venues a 20% cut in business rates. I won't stand by while these cherished local spaces disappear, replaced by boarded up windows and for sale signs. They're the heart of our communities and it's time we back them. Earlier today, he spoke to Sky News to explain why he'd gone for pubs and clubs but not others in the hospitality sector and how he'll fund this loss of revenue.
Before you became Prime Minister, you said that you would support cuts to VAT, a 10% cut to VAT for the hospitality sector. Why did you not do that now?
This is a first step today, but it's an important step. I made this commitment in the Makerfield by-election because we're losing pubs. Pubs need to know that the cavalry is coming. This is, to me, our heritage. It's working class culture. Once pubs are gone, they don't come back. So we've just got to signal what support when we can. That's why I've made this early announcement. This is a significant cut to the business rates that pubs and other venues pay. It could make the difference for a number of venues that are struggling, and it was right to confirm it quickly because, as I say, so much good happens bringing communities together, and when these places are gone, they don't come back, and we can't afford to lose any more.
Obviously, it's the fourth such move in as many days. How are you going to fund this one, and are we looking at tax increases at all?
Well, this is funded from within a change to business rates because you can't see all businesses the same. Some do real good in communities, and this pub where we are today, right in the heart of the community here in Harlow, bringing people together, met a older ladies mental health group. It's just a great thing that we still have places where people can come. But other businesses can cause social harm, so adult gaming centres on high streets can often bring real harm to communities. Then people will see the vape shops that often don't add much to community life and cause other issues too. So it's about developing a business rates regime where we really give incentives to support the businesses that bring benefits and look differently at those that cause social harm.
Interestingly, talking about like vape shops on the high street and the importance of cutting VAT for business rates or things like that on things that are part of the local community seems very similar to a certain MP for Gorton and Denton in her campaign. But either way, I think this is very good news. Music venues across the country have been in a real pickle since the pandemic era, and things haven't really picked up as much as one would have hoped that they would have done. I'm related to professional musicians, and they've told me what it's like for music venues and the music scene. So anything that would benefit those venues, in my mind, is a good thing. The issue I have really is that this level of favoritism for certain sectors of society, I can understand the justification, especially when you can think about the difference between like the social good that comes from these kind of specific community venues, what they create for community. And then you can also compare that to the socially deleterious effects of things such as gambling and vape shots, et cetera, which aren't just bad for the community, but, having lots of gambling addicts is bad for the economy, bad for like the broader health of the mental health of the population. So that would also be better to try and discourage through a business rates regime that encourages the social goods of these community spaces. But could you justify further cuts in other places to business rates for other hospitality businesses that are struggling? We'll see. Now, the subject of how all this would be paid for, yes, all 0.073% of the budget that this cut represents, was the point of contention from the opposition. Here's Tory MP Matt Vickers' response to the announcement when he was speaking with GB News.
This is the third unfunded spending commitment in 3 days. The first one was going to be paid for. Do you remember the first one? Day one, he told us he was going to fund that using net zero, basically doing away with costs that didn't actually exist. Digital ID, he said the costs that were associated with digital ID, he was going to scrap it and save all the money. It then turned out from the OBR, from the Chief Secretary of the Treasury, that budget never ever existed. Yesterday, the Transport Secretary was asked several times to work out how they were going to pay for this £2 cap. No answers. This one, he's going to do a review to find the money. Reviews don't mean money. Reviews mean lots of chit-chat and no answers. When this government came to office, this Labour government, those businesses, all leisure, hospitality and retail businesses on the high streets, those small businesses, were getting a 75% reduction in their business rates. They've took away the 75%, and now he's telling them he's giving them 20% back and he doesn't know how he's going to pay for it. It's pitiful. We need to be realistic in how we support these businesses. Under this Labour government, we've lost about 111,000 jobs in the hospitality sector. The last government created 18,000. This is pitiful. It's a disaster. And those businesses are on the front line. Small businesses going to the wall at the fastest rate since the world economic crash. 19% increase in unemployment. This is a disaster, and this is back of a fag packet job to come up with a policy that should appeal and should make a difference, but it's nowhere near enough. We're offering 100% relief, and we've got the figures to back it up on how we would fund that.
Yeah, it's been really difficult to fund £100 million of government spending. I said 0.0073%. It's not very much. Now, it is worth pointing out the 75% cut he's talking about was a COVID-era discount that was specifically had a sunset clause in it from the Conservative government, right? Like, that was going to come to a close, you know? And so that was only ever going to be a temporary measure. So I can't really complain too much about it going back to normal once we were kind of out of the pandemic period. It is also worth noting, too, when it comes to business rates, under the Conservative Party, when they were in office, the business rates regime and what was the kind of the multiplier for the rateable values for certain kinds of businesses were pretty kind of the same across the board when it came to small, medium, and large enterprises. In Rachel Reeves's budget, she changed it so that the multipliers for the rateable values, which they go up every 3 years, it just happened to coincide with the last year's budget that all of the business rates shot up because it was that 3-year reevaluation period. But she'd actually restructured the multipliers so that high street businesses, hospitality sector, had a much lower multiplier than big warehouses, expensive buildings and things like that, where the multipliers increased to be able to rejig the system in support of small businesses and hospitality. The Tories could have done that. They could have made it so that small businesses could compete with larger businesses, and they didn't. In fact, they kept giving all of the cuts for everybody, and large businesses were able to have all of that extra benefit. But now they've been able to have made less competitive against the smaller businesses from Rachel Reeves. The Tories could have done that. So them just kind of, as far as I can see, getting angry about the fact that their sunset clause wasn't continued or wasn't removed from the legislation they passed, and that the government has at least done something to help small businesses. I find this really difficult to be able to take, especially when, it's not a huge sum of money, really, is it?
Yeah, especially when the Tories are the party of small business. They're shameless. They're just shameless. This is a party that can even introduce a policy, and then when the next government comes to power and inherits it, criticize the government for having that policy. We've seen that. They're completely shameless. And they rely on the fact that the public have a short memory, which they do. And I'm not blaming the public on that. I'm actually blaming the media on that, because the media doesn't follow up hard enough on these stories. But I've been driven completely insane in the last few days by these questions about how are you going to pay for A, how are you going to pay for B, how are you going to pay for C? I mean, by the way, I am super suspicious of centrist governments, right? Like most people on the left. It takes me a while. I'm like, wait, is this good? Is this actually good? And I remember Ash was saying earlier on in the week on the show that the left suffers from a thing where we always rush to the negative. We always rush to the suspicion, right? Where we're like, no, this is like continuity stormer. But these policies that have been introduced in the last few days, I mean, they're good policies. Like they're absolutely good policies. This reduction in business rates for pubs and venues, that's a good policy, and people have been
super cheap.
Yeah, and it's cheap, and people have been crying out for it. And you were talking about how people in the music business, as you say, venues have been on their knees. I even had the owner of one of my local pubs talk to me about the rates when I was in there, and talk about how they were struggling and how they weren't sure how long, month to month, that they could get by. And I think you touched on it there. Pubs are, and particularly venues, they're social good, right? They help communities. So when you hear this argument from some people who on the right, who I've seen today on Twitter, who say, why are you favoring this one industry? Because it's an industry that helps the community because it's an industry where it creates social hubs for people. It's an industry that gives people the chance to get together and it helps people's mental health, right? So it's like if you look at all of these policies in the last few days, like I would contend that they're all policies that help the working class. And the fact is that you will never hear the media go harder on where's the money going to come from? Where's the money? Do you have a magic money tree? More than when it's stuff aimed at the working classes. And the detail that they've gone into, like, is it Stephen Swinford, who's a Times journalist? And he was saying, and he was saying on Twitter a couple of days ago, there's so much talk and so many questions about how this government is going to pay for the £2 bus. Who's talking about it? It's you who's talking about it. It's you and the Tories, and who else is talking about
Again,
it?
£400 million.
It's not a lot of money.
It's not a lot of money
It's
at all.
£400 million. But guess what? It's going to make actually a really big difference for a lot of people. Again, you have like the London media class who say, big deal, a £2 bus cap. It's actually a big deal for a lot of people. Guess what? A lot of people take the bus, and they take the bus a lot. And a lot of people have to commute on the bus for 2, 3, 4. Like there was a woman interviewed by BBC who was talking about how, because she travels 4 hours back and forth to work on the bus, and she was talking about how it was going to save her hundreds of pounds. And also, when again the London media class, don't seem to understand the concept that people in this country are living on a subsistence level, that a huge number of people in this country are living on a subsistence level. They have no savings. Their money is going on servicing debt sometimes. And a few pound matters. And like, see also the VAT on electricity bills. And I saw lots of people saying, big deal, it's £45, big deal, who cares? No, £45 a weekly shop for a lot of people. Like, I'm not saying it's a huge deal, but it's a significant deal. And
given like the context of like the dreary nature of Starmer's first days of his premiership, to me to come in and go, it's nothing massive, but it's something. It might help, right? And there was the Joseph Rowntree Foundation study that showed that 7.4 million households in this country at some point in the month have to go without an essential because their income is not as large as their outgoings in terms of bills, in terms of tax, in terms of all the rents that they have to pay. And, something like 45 quid, maybe a couple of quid a month, like that could be the extra that you need to be able to get you from the red into the black, for example. I mean, again, these things all add up eventually. And you compare it to the size of the state budget and the amount they're having to spend on this stuff. And you consider the amount that they want us to spend extra on defence, or the billions and billions and billions of pounds they want us to spend on defence, right? And they go, well, there needs to be a plan to pay for it. We'll just cut some capital budgets elsewhere. The immediate silence about this.
Yeah.
As soon as anything is there that's done for the public good, there's immediate suspicion about like the suitability or the long-term viability of the policy. And I'm like, turns out, look at Zohar Mamdani in New York City, turns out you can just spend money doing nice things for people. You can just be a good governor.
Because the ridiculous level that this got into about like I think it was about the bus fare cap, was they were talking about, they're going to take the like tropical forests forever facility and they're going to make it not a grant but a loan. But wait, we don't know how much interest is going to be charged on that loan. We demand to know how much interest is going to be charged on the loan that's going to fund this. And it's like, it's beyond parody. Like, and this was actually happening on TV, where I saw Heidi Alexander getting put under pressure. I think it was by Sophie Ridge saying, okay, but how much interest is going to be paid when you convert the grant into a loan? Like you just said, to find £400 million, and then the government can give billions to Ukraine. And I'm not even talking about whether that's right or wrong. What I'm talking about is that the government can give billions to Ukraine. Did you ever see Boris Johnson or Keir Starmer getting pushed into the nitty-gritty of, okay, but talk to me about this interest rate? It just doesn't happen. But when it's, hey, let's allow people to get the bus a little bit cheaper, all of a sudden they want to dig that deep into government funding.
Absolutely myopic.
It's crazy.
100% crazy, 100% crazy. I absolutely agree. Now, the cost of living measures have proven popular with the public. The Burnham bounce may be real, as the latest survey from Delta Poll has Labour up a staggering 8 points to put them joint first with Reform UK, also on 28. This appears to be the expense of the Greens, who are down 3. At an election, this would likely lead to a hung parliament, with Labour holding the balance of power. Now, do you think that this is some kind of genuine reaction to the kind of policies that we're seeing, or just is it kind of a honeymoon period, vibe-style reaction to Burnham as a figure?
I think it's a bit of both. I definitely think that, I definitely think there are vibes to it, right? Because
I mean, no one has like more rancid vibes than Keir Starmer.
Exactly. No, exactly. We've gone from this incredibly unpopular prime minister who had no ability to communicate, who made political mistake after political mistake after political mistake. My God, in contrast to, what's happened in Burnham's first few days in office. If you look at Starmer's first couple of months in office and all the missteps and disability allowance, he was screwed from day one. And so I do think people look at Burnham and think, oh, here's a guy who can speak well, who has a bit of personality, who speaks plainly, also in a way that I can understand. Feels like it feels like he's saying feels like he's speaking about things that I care about and things that impact my life, right? And I think that's a big thing for people.
And I think what's interesting is that, like, he has been a career politician. He's basically held one job before becoming a career politician, went to Oxbridge. It means that, but despite the fact that Keir Starmer did none of these things and is probably from a more kind of humble background, Andy Burnham literally sounds like 1,000 times more in tune with the public's priorities than Keir Starmer ever did, whilst claiming to care about the public's priorities. And because Keir Starmer is like 100% scripted, it's all just canards repeated that's been kind of drilled into him from Morgan McSweeney. When it comes to Andy Burnham, you see him speaking off the cuff, no script, and it's it sounds like somebody who believes in the things that they're saying. It may well be artifice, right? Again, I'm always going to withhold judgment until we actually see we eat the pudding, we find all the proof is, right? But just in terms of, as you say, the actual vibes of what's coming out here, like, it's night and day.
Yeah, again, like I said earlier, don't get me wrong, like people in the comments, I'm not saying, thank God for Andy Burnham. Andy Burnham is the saver. Labour is amazing now. Everything's good. No, I'm not. I'm inherently suspicious of this Labour government, and I'm suspicious of the cabinet that he's put in place. I'm suspicious of all of it. And again, like the proof is in the pudding. And yeah, I've never bought into the kind of like down home Northern boy done good thing, because as you say, this is a man who was raised like a little Labour Party baby, right? Like he only had, as you say, one job. It was from 21 to 24 on some trade magazine, right? And then it's into the Labour Party system. So like that's the reality of who he is. So like, yeah, there might be some artifice to it, but I think you hit upon something so important there. He knows a topic. He believes in a thing, and then he goes on, he talks about it with no script. Wow, revolutionary. I always thought, I'm going a little bit off here, but I always thought that was like the magic of Mick Lynch. Because when Mick Lynch went on Politics Live or whatever, he was put up against some Tory or Labour automaton who just like read off a script and refused to deviate from that script. And he knew what he was talking about, and he just talked. And people really respond to that, and yes, the policies. Farage too. Actually a great political communicator. And
Zach
also Trump is a good Zach Polansky is different. Again, he's come along, and yeah, maybe it's, the likes of Polansky and Mamdani who've shifted the dial a bit on that.
Well, the problem, of course, is that, again, Keir Starmer literally believed in nothing. He had no hinterland, apparently, according to an anonymous minister that spoke to, like, Tim Shipman for The Spectator, right? Like, he is a man who genuinely got into this position with all of the lines delivered to him, and then he's repeating like a minor bird to the public. No one believes it. No one bought into the project. And, like, again, whether or not Andy Burnham is being truthful, whether this is all that we're going to get, whether it's going to go further, like, and whether you agree with his politics, it's impossible to deny he is an infinitely more talented politician.
Oh my God.
Than Keir Starmer is. But again, what Rachel Reeves was, like I literally pointed out just 5 minutes ago, there was already a regime in place by Rachel Reeves at a previous budget to make the business rates regime significantly better for small businesses.
And nobody knew about it.
No one knows. No one, literally, everyone saw Rachel Reeves like she's a demon because there was just happened to be the 3-year point where the rateable values were reassessed. And that's hurt loads of businesses, but that's not her fault. Plenty of things are her fault, viewers at home. Don't get me wrong. But on this issue, she did a good thing. Does anyone know? No one knows. Gary Lineker has the right in uproar again after joining more than 100 UK-based millionaires calling on the government to tax them more. Lineker was the most prominent of the group that signed an open letter addressed to Andy Burnham, telling him we can afford it. Other signatories included Gary Stevenson, musician Brian Eno, film director Richard Curtis, and Ian Gregg. That's the former managing director of Greggs the Bakers, biggest fast food chain in the country now. The group that organised the letter, Patriotic Millionaires, supports a 2% tax on wealth over £10 million. Here's an extract. The value of fairer tax systems should be self-evident. We all know that trickle-down economics has not translated into reality. Instead, it has given us stagnating wages, crumbling infrastructure, failing public services, and destabilised the very institution of democracy. It has created a shameful economic system, incapable of providing a brighter, more sustainable future. These challenges will only worsen if you fail to address extreme wealth inequality. The true measure of a society can be found not just in how it treats its most vulnerable, but in what it asks of its wealthiest members. Our future is one of the tax pride or economic shame. That's the choice. Now, as you can imagine, the letter has already caused controversy. Here's Annunziata Rees-Mogg, yes, that is her real name, having it out with Jeremy Vine and Marvin Harrison earlier today.
It's people with 100 million aren't sitting on it. It is either being invested in companies that are operating and need to be invested in order to grow, in order to help our economy
or jewellery, or
improve.
Let's say I went to a party of a guy who's extremely rich. I won't say who it is because he's well known, but I said, "Is it true that the loo is left after the Monet?" And he said, "No, that's ridiculous. It's left after the Picasso." So, in other words, here's a gentleman who has a lot of fine art. So you just take a painting. They're worth about 20 million. Well, that's what Marvin wants.
A painting every year.
Take a painting every year.
So
that's what you want. That's what a wealth tax is.
No one who enjoys art will live in the UK.
Wow, all those people, all of those incredible productive paintings that they're holding may have to engage in some level of capital flight heaven for Fent. And Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Emma Mills, was asked about Patriotic Millionaires on Sky News this morning.
You'll have seen the call this morning from Patriotic Millionaires to add a wealth tax. Their call is for a 2% tax on wealth above £10 million. Is that a sensible suggestion to at least consider?
Well, look, it's day 4 of this new government, and obviously any major tax changes would be announced at a budget. I welcome the fact that people who of good means are saying that they want to pay more. They can pay more. There is a link on gov.uk. But look, we have to look at tax policy in the round, and we only make major tax announcements at budgets.
But worth considering?
Well, as I said, I'm not going to be drawn today. Day 4 in my new job, day 4 of this new administration.
I guess you're going to say something similar to this other suggestion that they include in their press release around the possibility of putting capital gains tax up.
As I said, I'm not going to come on the programme today and make tax announcements. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor have made clear that our fiscal credibility is absolutely vital and that we will meet our fiscal rules. But obviously, any tax changes and any spending changes that are very significant should be looked at in the round and justified in the budget.
I mean, of course, when it comes to Andy Burnham, we have like an erudite commentator who has beliefs, who wants to speak to the public about the things that he wants to do. And like, you try and find like the ministerial appointments from the people who've been like selected through like the spreadsheet for like Keir Starmer being Prime Minister. And we want to know what you think. Do you think that a wealth tax might potentially be a good idea? Should these potential tax rises on the rich be even considered? I'm not going to go into budget considerations yet. We want your opinion, please. One time, can we just hear an honest, sincere opinion from a politician rather than a rehearsed script? Because again, tax rises will probably have to happen for all of the myriad promises that Andy Burnham wants to do, right? Like, no one's expecting it all to get laid out the moment a policy is being announced, right? But I think we're all expecting taxes to go up eventually to make sure that the state that Andy Burnham clearly wants to build, if he's indeed being some way honest about his desire for nationalisation or public control or whatever it is. And it'd be nice to know the kind of things that maybe ministers might want to consider. Now, earlier today, I spoke to Julia Davies, a member of Patriotic Millionaires, and I began by asking her why the open letter was sent today.
We're hoping to get our message out there now that there's so much investment that's needed in British public services and infrastructure, and we need to access where the money is. So as you know, if we've been saying for some time, there's been this extreme concentration of wealth into the hands of fewer and fewer people. When you've got 50 of the wealthiest families in the UK having more wealth between them than half of all British people, things have just got out of kilter. And so there's for a number of reasons, we really need to be reassessing how we raise taxation to fund all those public services and infrastructure. And particularly as now, society has changed many ways for the better. We have an aging population because we've made such leaps forwards in healthcare. But that does mean that we have, less working people looking after more and more retired people. And then we have AI coming along, which, as you know, will mean that a lot of wealth creation won't bring along with it job creation. So on that basis alone, we can't just carry on relying predominantly on taxing income from going out to work. We really have got to be looking at this resource, which is wealth concentration. And, we've got 10 proposals to increase taxation of wealth. And between them, they would bring in such a much needed 50 billion pounds a year. And, really, really desperately need that to be looked at for the best interests of people of Britain as a whole.
You obviously have called yourself in the Patriotic Millionaires. From what I can hear from, this is a real kind of social mission about like the fabric of the country that you're talking about here.
Well, yeah, but isn't it absolutely everybody's interest? It doesn't matter how much money you've got. It's in your interest to live in a country that's thriving, which has got functioning public services. Sometimes we get this narrative that, if you're really rich, you've got private healthcare, it doesn't matter about the NHS anymore. Well, that's just not true, because anyone that's got private healthcare will know, it's good for knees and hips and that kind of thing, elective surgery. It's not going to be there for you if you're in a road traffic accident. It's not going to be there for you when you've got really, really serious illnesses. So, my mum, just over a year and a half ago, she spent over 3 months in hospital, in an NHS hospital, being incredibly well looked after when she was really, really ill. We spoke to the doctors. There was nothing that private health could do for her there. Really serious stuff. You are reliant on the NHS and all the amazing people that work for that. So, it's in the interest of absolutely everyone that we are funding these services properly.
100%, 100%. And of course, the more sick people there are who rely on the NHS for everything, the worse off the economy will be for everybody, which creates an even further socially deleterious kind of situation for the country. Now, when it comes to obviously the politics of this, with a new Prime Minister in charge, have you been reaching out to the Labour Party? What's been their response?
So we're constantly trying to reach out and speak to anyone that will talk to us. We're not party political. We want to basically try to raise these issues and create, challenge the narrative that there's any reason why we can't do this. We do polling on a regular basis, which shows support from millionaires for paying increased tax, to help our country do better, because, all of us have got either businesses that we're involved in or businesses that we invest in. We've got friends and family that we care about, and all of those reliant on properly funded, services and infrastructure. So one of the predominant news stories today is about having to release prisoners early. That is because we've massively underfunded our criminal justice system at all ends. I'm really passionate about the lack of provision for our young people, both in education, but also in youth services. We've closed down so many youth clubs, so many youth workers have gone. And then can we be surprised that, young people are then vulnerable to, bad influences? We don't want them sat at home on their screens, and we're not providing safe spaces for them to go to, which, those safe spaces were available for me when I was growing up. So I'm really quite ashamed that we are not providing the same things for young people today that I benefited from. That's just wrong. We should always be trying to do better for our young people than we enjoyed ourselves.
And has there been any kind of positive responses that you've got from politicians about the policies that you're proposing? Are any parties picking up those policies, do you know?
There's many MPs, I think, who really support what we're doing, and we will keep talking about this. We will keep on, pressing our case. But what we really need is for the public to just say, we've had enough of this. We've had enough of basically our financial system being run for the few at the expense of the many. We all know that the opportunities for working people have been going backwards. So my parents' generation, you could have one person going out to work and they could afford to buy a house fairly young, they could afford to provide for their family. And right now we have 2 adults working in a household, working really hard, often multiple jobs, and they're reliant on food banks to feed the family, let alone, thinking about being able to buy a house. So that whole structure is, that's happened because we've had this concentration of wealth. One of the stats that really blew my mind and got me more involved in this organisation was when I heard that basically just over 35 years ago, when the Sunday Times Rich List started, net public wealth, so the difference between public assets and our liabilities, was about 340 billion. And then 35 years later, it was 1 trillion in the red, minus 1 trillion. And at the same time, the wealth of the 200 wealthiest families in the UK had increased 17 times over. So that's just such a clear example of how there's been this huge transfer of public wealth into a limited number of private hands. And to me, that's a waste of money and resources. We think a lot about poverty. I think about everything that we are losing in terms of public wealth. All those public swimming pools, sports facilities, youth clubs, libraries, of course. We've almost given up on them, haven't we? And there's just no need for that. I mean, I think that we could have such a hopeful and ambitious vision for our country. And I just see this clogging of wealth in private hands as being such a waste of money that really should be out there just making things better for our young, our old, and everybody in between.
Now, a lot of the response from people who are skeptical of the plans that you're proposing has been the discussion around capital flight or a wealth exodus or things like that. Do you have any responses to those kind of criticisms?
A lot of the news stories about all of that, of course, have been based on PR issued by Wealth Migration Services. So it's literally, I always say it's like a carpet salesman saying everyone's going out and getting a new carpet. Of course, they want everyone to think that that's what they're doing. They want to make it seem as though that's socially acceptable. That's what people are doing. It's not socially acceptable. It's actually, if you've made money in a country and you've benefited from the investment everybody makes in education, in health, in, our infrastructure. And then once you incredibly fortunate position to have made wealth, you choose not to stay and, let your country benefit from that wealth that's been created. Then, that's normal. I wouldn't say that is normal behaviour. Now, of course, people have always chosen to move abroad just for lifestyle reasons. No problem with that whatsoever. Loads of people always have it in their mind that, if they make money, they're going to choose to retire abroad because they like going surfing or they, like that lifestyle. That's completely normal, but to specifically move yourself and your family abroad to avoid investing in the NHS, I think we need to stop treating that as anything other than really quite abnormal behaviour. And, our polling shows that most millionaires really proud to live in the UK. They love everything, all of our culture. I think, the British people have got fantastic sense of humour. We've got, great green spaces, fantastic music, culture. I wouldn't want to move away from that. I certainly wouldn't want to move away from my family and friends just to avoid contributing, to the NHS and making sure our young people are getting the start in life that they deserve.
And what would you say to people at home who want to again get involved in the campaign that you're doing and what's best to support the movement?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So you can contact your MP and you can tell them you're behind this campaign. And we work very closely with other organisations like Tax Justice UK. I mean, Oxfam work on this every year. So yeah, please do let your MPs know that this is what you demand. You're not asking for it. You're demanding a fairer future for British people. And it's basically those people are working really, really hard, and those small to medium-sized businesses that are struggling, that have been seen as the source of the extra money that, our country needs. So, putting up national insurance on employment, so employers' national insurance, as an alternative to asking those who've got considerable levels of wealth to pay a proportionately small amount towards taxation, that's not in the best interests of British people or British businesses as a whole. It's not the best interest of those businesses which are really at the heart of our communities. And I think that's who we should be thinking about. They're the ones that really that we all have such fondness for. We don't want to lose them. So if we don't want to lose them, we've got to support them.
Earlier this week, the US House of Representatives passed a bill to increase military cooperation with Israel, what some have been describing as an attempt to merge the two forces. Whilst 7 Republicans voted to oppose the $1.15 trillion bill, it passed due to 6 Democrats crossing the floor to back President Trump. In the run-up to the passing of the bill, top Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith, spoke to Krystal Ball of breaking points about his concerns with what was included. And instead, he ended up in a very long discussion around the nature of the US's relationship with Israel and the history of the colonization of Palestine.
And yeah, it comes down to a fundamental question. Does Israel have a right to exist? Now, I'll tell you, and this is absolutely the DSA position, is that they don't. Okay.
Well, let's pause on that. I want to get to the DSA, and I don't want to fight you on all of this, but I want you to get to your point. I got to get through this.
Yeah. I got to get through this.
Okay.
So if you have a situation where Israel is threatened on all sides, and I know it's like, well, no, I'm not saying they don't have a right to exist, just they have to let all the Palestinians back in, and then effectively the Jews no longer control Israel. Okay.
Well, I'm sorry, but don't you is an idea of equal rights for all ethnicities something that you, in theory, support as a Democrat?
Well, sure, but the practical result of this is if you say there should be equal rights within Israel, but if Israel allows it, they cease to exist as a country.
No, they cease to exist as a Jewish ethno-state. That's very different from ceasing to exist as a country.
Oh, come on. Hold on. Stop.
My other question was, why is
no, we got to drill down.
An issue for U.S. taxpayers?
We got to drill down on that. Okay. All right. They cease to exist as an ethno-state. So basically, Jews would live in Palestine and be governed by the Palestinians, by the Arabs. Okay. And maybe that's just what has to happen in the minds of some people, but understand the consequences of it. Understand why Israel was created in the first place, so that the Jews would have some place to go, okay?
Right,
and
but
to just blithely say, well, yeah, it'll go away and it'll be fine. So that's point one.
Well, first of all, you're mischaracterizing my position, but
what is your position?
Second of all,
what is your position?
Second of all, you're ignoring that Israel was not created and a land with no people.
No. I know it wasn't.
There were people there. They were displaced.
Right. Very few countries ever were.
The Nakba.
Yeah.
There is a dispute over land.
Yes.
And Israel today, which I think is what you were getting to, is an apartheid ethno-state that, and I don't think you use this language, but that is in the process of committing a genocide.
Of course, I support equal rights between different ethnicities. But, and it's always the but, isn't it? It's always the but, isn't it, with Israel supporters about their kind of claimed liberal values. Now, it's worth pointing out, by the way, that some unitary state or a binational state wouldn't necessarily come down to the Jews being ruled by the Arabs. Again, there are 7 million Jews in the area of Israel and Palestine. Likewise, there are 7 million Arabs between the 5 million in Palestine and the 2 million in Israel. Any kind of democratic state would have some representation from both. You can look at Lebanon as a model that has some representation depending on religion or ethnicity. And also the idea that somehow there would be one group ruling the other, or that they would somehow be unable to form a state. Well, that happened in South Africa. In South Africa, everyone was just think of the retribution that will come towards the colonists if there is an end of apartheid, like there would have to be in Israel and Palestine should a unitary state be created. And I'm like, not something that happened in South Africa. Not something that happened there. Turns out you actually can integrate people post-apartheid. That's what the evidence shows from the history of the other countries that ended their apartheid. Now, Smith then drilled down further into why he disagreed with the one-state solution.
But look, I have concerns about Hamas, about Hezbollah, that people don't seem to share. Let's say that this plays out the way you describe, and okay, there is no Jewish ethno-state, and the consequence of that is there is no Jewish state. Basically, you have the Palestinians, as they would now be governing that area, and that means Hamas would be governing that area. Do you have any problem with that? Do you have any problem with Hamas suddenly becoming a much more powerful entity and having the country, from the river to the sea, if you will now be a Hamas-run state on the Mediterranean? Are you okay with that?
First of all, I'm not convinced that would be the reality.
Well, how would it not be the reality?
I don't know how you can get away from how illiberal it is to not support equal rights for people regardless of if they're Jewish, Arab, Muslim, Christian,
totally with you. Look,
and then the other piece is,
but Hamas doesn't support equal rights either.
But do you support a two-state solution? Is that your idea?
Look, yes.
So how do we get there? How do we get there? Stop. Hold on.
I can answer this.
How do we get there at a time
when
you have settlements that have made it effectively impossible.
There's something I have to explain before all of this makes sense.
In order to create a Palestinian state.
Look, let's go back to what you said. I support a two-state solution. I am also aware of the fact that it's probably no longer possible. You didn't let me get that part out. Okay, which is really kind of important to this whole conversation.
I would agree, yeah.
And it's very disappointing. I mean, and there's a lot of blame to go around for why we got there. Yes, I would like to see a two-state solution. I am not naive, as you just described, to know that it's simply not on the table at this point. And that creates a massive, massive problem. But the idea, again, that the easy solution is, okay, we get rid of the Jewish ethno-state, and the details of how Israel is currently running, their country, there are Arabs in the parliament, but there are parts of it that aren't. Okay, so we get rid of that.
Okay.
So what's your idea for what replaces that? You say you're not convinced that it would be a Hamas-run thing.
Well, I've offered that. Listen, I really honestly think that this is something for Palestinians and Israelis to decide. I don't know why it is the American taxpayers' business to fund this.
And again, that's why I voted for the Massey Amendment.
But what is actually your idea? Because if you're saying, you don't support a one-state solution, you don't support a two-state solution, there is no good solution, that's where you are. That is the reality of where we are now.
Right. So much to unpick there in terms of, so if there would be an end to the occupation, there would be a Hamas-run state. I'm like, well, first of all, even if we just take it as read that Hamas will continue to exist, despite the fact they don't even control Gaza anymore, given the fact that it's been handed over to the Board of Peace's governance of the Strip. First of all, they don't even have a democratic plurality in current polling amongst Palestinians. Even if they stuck around as a political entity, they would still, on current polling, lose politically to the more secular, the more kind of democratic parts of the Palestinian kind of political parties that currently exist. And second of all, Hamas exists as a consequence of the occupation. Hezbollah exists as a consequence of the occupation of South Lebanon and the continued belligerence between Israel and its neighbors. You get rid of the occupation, in what need would there be for Hamas to exist? They would lose their raison d'etre if tomorrow the occupation of Palestine ended. That is the entire reason why they exist. It's also worth pointing out, by the way, in an Arabic language interview, Osama Hamdan from the Hamas Politburo said that any ethnicity we welcome in a future Palestinian state. Now, they would obviously want an Arab state with multiple people of different ethnicities being allowed to live there. That is a significantly more inclusive model of statehood than what Israel currently has, which is where there is one ethnicity that is prioritized over the others, even when it comes to the law. And again, we are seeing another liberal there going, well, there just has to be an ethno-state. I'm a liberal who supports equality of ethnicities, except when it comes to Israel. And there has to be an ethno-state because, well, if we get rid of the ethno-state, there'll be Hamas-run Palestine, the Holy Land, whatever you want to call it. And there's just no evidence for any of the things that he is saying here. And again, it comes down to this idea that somehow he believes that there would be ethnic retribution from the Palestinians, which again, we have no evidence that this would be the case. Now, obviously, he's struggling to control the narrative here. Smith then tried to give the audience a history lesson, and it doesn't go well.
But let's understand the history of this. There's a great book called Palestine 1936 that described what was going on there. So you were coming to the end of the British Mandate. And you had, the Jews had been coming in since the 19th century. They'd been there a long, long time ago. And they were looking for, a place to be. The Palestinians were looking to drive out the British. And the Palestinians and the Arabs reached a conclusion in the mid-1930s and said, okay, Jews, you can stay, but you're not going to run anything. Okay. Jews said, no, we can't stay. So they started a civil war. Okay. And they fought. And then, of course, 1948, they got the country created. Another war was started. A war, and I know people say, well, this is a war to drive the Palestinians out. It was also a war to eliminate Israel. To basically kill Israel in the crib in 1948. And they fought and they fought and they fought and they fought. And at no point was there ever anything carved out for the Jews. And so the Jews have been fighting an existential fight. And
it's so hard for me to, because I know you consider yourself, I think, liberal. You would describe yourself that way, in the classical liberal sense.
But there's no liberal option on the table here. That's what I'm telling you.
Why?
You keep saying,
illiberal
Jews, we cannot have. Illiberal Palestinians are fine.
No, but why should...
And I voted for it, it shouldn't.
Why should
I already answered that question.
Taxpayers,
it shouldn't.
Okay, so, and is that your answer for this particular amendment, or will that continue to be your position moving forward?
That's where we're at.
So you're done with the U.S. funding Israel?
I think
work it out themselves.
Yeah, I'm not 100%. I got to say. I mean, look, if tomorrow there's a peace agreement, okay, and they actually go forward with something where they create a reasonable alternative for the Palestinians in Gaza, if they actually stop what they're doing in the West Bank and get to peace in Lebanon, that may change. I don't see that happening, which is why I gave you the answer I gave. But again, this notion that somehow there's a liberal option on the table, and how could we possibly support the illiberal state of Israel? What's going to come in there? Okay, that's going to be liberal.
I mean, the options for a singular democratic secular state or a binational state, these options have been on the table for a while. George Habash wanted one for the entirety of the time he was leader of the PFLP, right? There have always been people who've been looking for these kind of things, and the longer and longer the occupation has gone on, the less likely these things have been on the table from both sides, it does seem. Now, when it comes to the history of this, you can see me and Barry getting very angry watching him say the things that he was saying. And I'm just like, no one was kind of looking back at the history and say the Palestinians behaved perfectly. Clearly, they did not. Like, the history of Al-Amin Husseini is not one that people will look upon fondly. But the idea that the Jews just turned up and said, we would like a state, please. And the Palestinians were like, no, we'll not give you one. I'm like, they had plans upon Zionism right from the beginning, like labor Zionism happening, people buying land, wanting to be able to find ways to be able to control more and more of Palestine during the British Mandate. And of course, there were ethnic conflict at some points, like there was riots that happened over during that period. No one's denying that fact, like what happened in Hebron, and the actions of the British have to be blamed here as well. The idea that it was just Jews going, please, we would just like, we'd just like to be able to a place to be, rather than an explicit plan for the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from at least some of Palestine, if not all of Palestine. Remember, like he talks about Israel being killed in the crib at the start of the 1948 Arab-Israeli war. And I'm like, well, that's on the assumption that Israel must have to exist at some point. When it's worth pointing out, the Avner Plan, which was the military strategy that Ben-Gurion asked for from his military leaders in Haganah and places like that, which was explicit in the desire to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Palestine to create a Jewish ethno-state. This requires explicit ethnic cleansing. The Avner Plan dates back to 1937, 11 years preceding the Arab-Israeli War. The idea that the invasion is why there is some Nakba that happened during that period, rather than it was the plan of the Zionists from the beginning, shows that Palestinians were right to be wary about people coming there with explicitly Zionist goals, rather than people arriving as refugees, or indeed the many Jews who already lived in Palestine, who were living there perfectly fine before Zionism was even a thing. Now, Barry, why are politicians so happy to eschew their liberal values only when it comes to Israel, do you think?
Helena, stop. Sorry, I'm being him.
Stop.
That was my Adam Smith impression. Stop. I like what spectacular mansplaining. Well, it's the old thing, right? It's progressive except Palestine. We've seen it in the US for decades, right? I mean, the Republicans and the Democrats have always been in lockstep on this. But I think that and remarkable to hear him openly say the ethno-state might cease to exist. Just a bold admission from a Democrat there that Israel should be an ethno-state. But I think what's interesting is that they're now out of step with the American public. Before, the American public was behind a position like that on Israel, or behind a Republican position on Israel. But the polls are all showing now that is shifting, and shifting fast. It was already shifting before October the 7th. I remember, was it the Sheikh Jarrah protests in East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem, that happened in 2021. And there were polls that showed that among young people, opinions on Palestine were starting to shift, because footage on Sheikh Jarrah was, even in 2021, it was getting out on social media and people are changing their minds. Now he is massively, massively out of step. If you listen to some of the things that when the mask dropped, because what's interesting about Adam Smith is that recently he had kind of started to soften his tone a little bit. Like he
voted against the NDAA.
Yeah, exactly.
He explicitly voted against this. I mean, maybe it was just the Iran war rather than just Israel, but he did vote for the Massey Amendment too.
And isn't it the National Defense Authorization Act that there was like an amendment to it that Rouhani had put forward, and he was against it, and then he subsequently said, Adam Smith said that actually he was now for it. And an interesting thing, I think I read this in an interview that he did with the Washington Post, where he was partly saying that he was coming under pressure and this is key, he was coming under pressure from his constituents. And he mentioned one constituent in particular who had come to him and said that he was like a very strong supporter of Israel, but he did not like what Netanyahu was doing, right? And Smith seemed to take that on board because I think he started to understand that, there could be an electoral cost in him not softening his position.
I mean, there is a challenger.
Way.
He has
there's
a
primary
challenger.
challenger.
Is challenging him in his seat in the
that.
primary, right? He knows he has to make a pitch to voters about Palestine. Unfortunately, what he seems to have done there is do what Bill Clinton did at the election, go up to Michigan and talk about Judea and Samaria.
Yeah, exactly. He was softening his tone. It was politically smart. And then he goes on there and the mask absolutely drops. The other thing that I found like really objectionable about that was this notion, I think you said it yourself, that that there's going to be some kind of retribution against the like quote unquote Arabs, against the quote unquote Jews. It comes back to this sort of pervasive idea that you see in mainstream media and from mainstream politicians that Palestinians are somehow inherently bloody warlike, and violent and barbaric and savage and can't be trusted, when we know, because we haven't just seen in the last almost 3 years, we've seen 4 decades that the most aggressive entity in the Middle East is Israel. The country that has attacked most countries around the region is Israel. And the country that's running an apartheid state and currently committing a genocide is Israel. If he wants to talk about ethnic cleansing in a historical sense, ethnic cleansing is happening right now. It's happening right now in front of him. So, completely objectionable to go on and make those points. And I hope it hurts him in Washington.
I mean, he even said in that interview when he was asked directly by Krystal Ball, do you regret your votes to support Biden bear-hugging Netanyahu? And he said, no, I don't actually regret any of that. When Biden's own officials are now saying that they think it was wrong. Like, well, again, like there's stuff like, well, don't invade Rafah or we'll cut off the aid. They've invaded Rafah. Oh, sorry.
Wiped it off the map.
Yeah, literally. Like, literally, you can go to the Wikipedia page for Rafah now, and it's changed is to was.
It's gone.
Yeah, because it's gone. It doesn't exist
And that was a
anymore.
red line.
Yeah, that was Biden's red line, and plenty of officials from the administration have said what they did was wrong. And he can't say he was wrong now that, I guess, the Iran war is the political issue that's sailing when it comes to...
It just demonstrates how they're uniparty when it comes to Israel. And it demonstrates why, potentially the DSA is becoming a more powerful political force. And you know what? If that's the attitude, then more power to the DSA anyway. But if that's the kind of thing we're getting from Dems like Adam Smith, then, yes, more power to the DSA, primary them all.
100%. Like, 'cause again, these people are not used to having to explain their own personal values sincerely, or at least try and represent the values of their constituents. They've been allowed to be, in lots of cases, corporate mouthpieces for the entirety of their career because the Democratic Party thing to do was wait your turn rather than challenge in primaries. They've not had to fight in primary challenges. So many members of both the Senate and the House have been able to coast off of not having worried about primaries. It happened to Joe Crowley with AOC. It happened to Adriano Espaillat when it came to Davies Avila Chevalier. And they are now having to realize you have to tell your constituents that you're going to represent their interests. That's your job. Your job as a legislator is to vote in the interest of what your constituents want you to do as their representative, not to entirely engage on your own personal crusade outside of the interest of the people who pay for your salary as an elected official.
How revolutionary.
Indeed so. Thank you very much, Barry, for joining me tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Helena.
Indeed so. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Come back tomorrow for another live stream from 6 p.m. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. Good night.